All right, welcome back, everyone, to another Cybersecurity Reloaded workshop hosted by the Q Project. We're doing these every week, so you can join in Thursday nights. This week, I'm going to be touching on what I did last time I was on here and talking more about authentication. But this week, I'll be talking about what OAuth is, which is a type of framework that a lot of websites and companies use today that most people don't really know how it works or that it even exists. So the reason why OAuth came into, or not the reason why it came into existence, but one of the reasons why it came around was to solve a problem with single sign-ons. So like I talked about last time, a single sign-on is something that a lot of large organizations and businesses use, where it lets you access multiple applications with a single login. As a student at UC Merced, we do this every school day. Whenever you sign into your UC Merced account, you see the UC Merced login page with the single sign-on, and that gives you access to your bills to pay, to your email, CAT courses. Those are all different applications, but you only sign in once at the beginning of the day. And so the goal for our computer security people that are working is they want the entire internet to work this way, so that once you log in you jump on the internet, log into your beginning login screen, and then all of your applications for that day just require that single sign-in, and you don't have to worry about logging in anymore. A lot of websites have this nowadays, and I'll show you with some examples later on, but the whole internet hasn't implemented this. But the reason why it's becoming more and more popular is because OAuth is a framework that allowed it to become reality. So what is OAuth? OAuth is the open standard authorization protocol, and it lays out how unrelated servers and services access each other's assets. And so one way to call it is it's called a secure third-party delegated authorization. So these unrelated servers and services are sharing each other's assets with each other, or they're sharing assets to another third-party company without sharing the initial sign-on or login credentials. So a third-party application can request from another application information without requiring a person to log in a second time to access that third party's information. And today, OAuth 2.0 is what is used mostly around the internet. It came out a few years after OAuth 1.0. I think it came out around 2015. And the main difference is that OAuth 2.0 is a framework and not a protocol. So instead of laying out the exact specific way that you need to communicate using OAuth 2.0 now is just a kind of a diagram, and it explains how you go about using OAuth, and every business implements it however way they feel like. But it describes the process for how you need to implement it. And so why is OAuth a thing? The main reason is that companies want you to access other services that help their service become more useful. So by accessing a large one is Google, and I'll talk about that in a second, but a lot of Google services people use on a day-to-day basis. And so for a small business, it would make sense that you want to allow access to someone's Google's. If someone has data on Google, you want them to be able to access that data through your web page if that's something that you need to have happen. And so OAuth allows for that to happen securely. And so another idea to touch on is the difference between basic authentication and OAuth. Basic authentication is what is used a lot or in the past and still used today. And one of the best ways to explain the difference between the two is a house key versus an ID card, or like a RFID reader. So with basic authentication, a user if you think of it as a house key, a user to get into their house, they need a key. And this key, once you open the front door, gives you access to every single bedroom in the house. And basic authentication works the same way. You have a username, you have a password, you log into the website, and you gain access to the whole application or all of your users' data. And today, more people use multi-factor authentication. If you don't know what that is, I talked about it the last time I made a presentation. It's just the idea of having more than one base of authentication. So having a username and password along with biometrics or along with a token like your phone. So more people use multi-factor authentication today, but not everyone does. And this leaves security risks because if someone hacks into your account, figures out your password, they have access to all of your data. None of it is kept behind layers. Once they get in, they're in, and they can access it whenever and wherever they need to. With OAuth, it can be explained good with the example of an ID card. So as an employee or as a student in college, you get an ID card that gives you access to only the buildings you need to access. And so as an employee, you would be able to open the front door and you would be able to open your office or maybe a conference room, and that authentication or access can be removed at certain times and given to you at different times. OAuth works the same way. So instead of giving you a username and password that you would use to log in, it gives you a token, and that token, when you need information, you give the server a token that lets you know that you're the correct person, and then they can give you the data. The great thing about tokens is the whenever and wherever goes away, because these tokens have expiration dates and degrees of access. So a token may say you have access to this specific website or this specific page for only 20 minutes. And once that token expires, you no longer have access. So as a hacker, it makes it a lot more difficult because you might be able to steal this token, but then you don't have complete access, and that access goes away after a specific amount of time. And so some examples of how we see this day to day. I chose Expedia's website, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot more common ones that you use day to day. But as you can see here, a lot of websites no longer have a sign up button. They just have a sign in with a third party service. So Google, Facebook were the two large ones. You see Apple doing it a lot more often nowadays. But the idea is that instead of creating a new username and password to sign into Expedia, you would go to Google or Facebook's website. They're going to authenticate that you're a legit person, and then Expedia will give you access to their services by using your authentication from Google or Facebook. Another way we see this day to day as students at UC Merced or anyone that uses Canvas, when you're uploading a file, you probably used a feature at least once where you click Google Doc and you submit a Google Docs file or a Google Doc slide. And this is using OAuth because Canvas has to request access from Google to use your data from Google. They're not just able to log into your Google account and grab your presentation that you created in your own account. And OAuth allows that to happen. And so looking at a diagram for how this works, the most basic form is you have your application and your client, and there's going to be something that you need from another service. We'll pretend that that service is Google because that's the most used one. So the app that you're on is going to request or send an authorization request to the resource owner, Google, and they're going to send an authorization grant. And this is going to be a type of code that you can hold on to. Then the application can send that grant to the API or the server that's authorizing you and say, look, I got this code from your owner and I need to access your data. And they're going to send back an access token. And this access token is what OAuth is good for. So now that you have an access token, that token has an expiration date and it has a level of access that you're able to get into the system. So now whenever you need to request data from Google on the right, you would send that access token. The server is going to notice that you have the correct access token, and it's going to send back its protected resources or data to you. And so what I want to explain is how Spotify's OAuth works, since I'm going to be looking more into their services and trying to use it to create a program. I don't know how many people use Spotify, but if you've ever seen this web page, this is an example of OAuth, where it says, would you like to connect Last.fm to your Spotify account? Spotify is using OAuth to allow access to a third-party service such as Last.fm, and they do it in a nice way where they ask for your authority to gain access to it. So I'm going to switch pages and go to Spotify's developer web page. I was on this website the last time I did a workshop, and as you can see, this page here is a guide for how to use Spotify's authorization. And if we scroll down here, this flow chart right here is very similar to the one that I explained here, but this is detailed because Spotify has developed the framework to work for them. So with their application, or not their application, but whatever application you're using, if you would like to request Spotify information, so you see a lot of websites do this where they'll have like a mini player that's playing music, or you'll be on a website that has someone's playlist of songs from Spotify, and you're able to play it directly from the web page. This all happens because of APIs, but behind the scenes, OAuth allows that to happen securely. So as an application, the first step you can do is request authorization to access Spotify's data. Spotify will then figure out what type of access you need. If it's something that requires a login, then the user would need to log in. Logging in only happens, say, you need to access someone's playlist. That's private data to the user, so you would need to request that that user logs into their Spotify and then authorizes it to go through. If you're just doing something like, say, hey, play this song from Spotify, that doesn't require user access, so you can skip the user and you can just request that song from Spotify, and then you can play it through your website or your application. Once this first step is done, you go down to the second step, and this is where you've gotten your authorization or your code of authorization. You're then going to send that to Spotify, and they're going to return you a token. And then that token is going to have an expiration date. It's going to tell you what you can access. If you've logged into a user, it's going to tell you that you have access to all that user's information. And then you can use that access token to request data. So anytime you need a song, anytime you need to request a playlist, you're going to send that access token, and then they're going to return the information in their JSON object file. And then from there, since tokens expire, there's going to be a point where the token expires. And so they'll give you a second. It's not going to be another authorization code. You won't have to go back to stage one, but you're going to get another token that allows you to request a new token. And then you start back at stage 3. You request the new token, then you go back, and then you have the ability to begin requesting data again from their services. And if we take a step down, it breaks down the authorization code flow in each step, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first step is authorizing your application, or having your application request authorization. The way this happens is with a GET request. So you're going to say GET Spotify.com/authorize you're going to include the client ID of your application. This happens when you register your application with Spotify. Then you're going to have the response type, which is always code in this situation. And then here is an important part, the redirect URI. So what's going to happen is you're going to say get from this website authorization code, and then it's going to need to redirect back to your website. So you get your authorization code, and then it sends you back to the website that you want the user to be at. And then from there, you can move on to step 2, where you request a token using that authorization code. This, I believe, where was it at? Oh, it's right here. So you can say when you request a token, it's a post instead of a get. So you're saying post with this URL, and you give them the authorization code, and then in return you get your token that you can use to request information. From there, you can move on down to using your token to access information. And then when you need to request access to tokens again, once your token expires, it's another post request to their API token website link. And with that, that's about all I was going to explain today. So with that, these are the sources I used. And that's it for my presentation. If there's any questions, feel free to ask.